My name is Megan Roberts. I'm the executive director of an organization called Math for America. How many of you have heard of Math for America before? Oh, look at that. In addition to the folks to my left, who I will introduce to you very shortly, there's also some other teachers from our organization who are here as well. Jose Wilson's in the back. And a little shout out to Jose, who's giving a talk right after this. See this, Jose? At 12:30 in what salon? What salon was it? Come on, you're taking up H. He's got a book, he's doing a book. Well, then you should come up and have some of mine. I've had too much. Mohammed and Sodi are right here up front. They're also teachers in our fellowship. Are there any other MFA teachers here who we don't know? All right, cool. But it seems like there's a lot of Math for America fans. So thanks for joining us today. What I wanted to do before we get started and sort of is to lay a little bit of a foundation and talk to you very briefly about what Math for America does, who we are as an organization and what we do. And I think the way that I'll frame that is probably highlighting most importantly what we don't do as the root for who we are and what we believe. And if I do my job well, I will segue with complete grace to the panelists who we can do some introductions for, and we'll sort of take it away from there. We've organized this talk into 5 or 6 little discussion strands, but we'll leave it to the natural flow of our conversation to decide if we sort of align these strands. And for those of you who are interested, there's an app company here called Slido, anybody? Who is has set up a sort of Q&A function. So if you're interested in posing questions at any time throughout the next hour, you can go to slido.com. We're in Salon E, and you can pose your questions. I have the questions that are showing up right here on a feed here, and we'll riff on those questions as it's related through the session. Should that be of interest to people? Zero pressure. We're not going to do the stand-up mic form of Q&A. Sound okay? Okay, so very briefly, let me tell you about Math for America, and then I want to introduce the panelists. We're a nonprofit. I think that's the most important thing to say. We're rooted in New York City, and we work on a variety of initiatives nationally, both as it relates to policy and teacher education, as well as funding lots of STEM initiatives. And we're somewhat unique in that we are a nonprofit ensconced within a family foundation. So really the most important thing to know about that is we use all private dollars to run our entire nonprofit, which in my world is great because I don't have to raise money. Nevertheless, really the crux of what we do in New York City is we run fellowship programs for accomplished mathematics, science, and computer science teachers. As of today, there's a little over 1,000 teachers in New York City that have one of our fellowships, just to give you a little bit of sense of scale. There are about 10,000 math or science teachers in New York City, so about 10% of the teachers who teach in New York City are in our fellowships. And our fellowships, I won't go into too much of the processes of our fellowships, but I do want to point out the sort of main crux of just the nuts and bolts. So you can apply to Math for America if you're an accomplished teacher already. That's sort of the whole thing. It's not a teacher training program, it's not a PD program, it's not a fix-it program at all. So our sort of theory of action, if you will, or our model, is we run a fellowship community by teachers, for teachers, of teachers. So we accept, through some blood, sweat, and tears, which is a pretty rigorous application process. It's pretty competitive, this fellowship, but once you're accepted for a 4-year cycle. I'm a firm believer in professional relationships are built over years, not days. And so these fellowships are for 4 years. And then the teachers form communities, whether it's in content or pedagogy or whatever they're interested in. They teach courses to one another, on behalf of one another, for one another, with some other outside expertise that comes along. So I don't want to take up much more time about Math for America, except to say that it is, we go against the grain in a lot of what people intuit we are, if they hear our name, or if they've heard of TFA, or if they think of PD, because we're not Teach for America, we're Math for America, a very different organization. We actually bought the URL for not TFA about 8 or 9 years ago. It was $25. Huge fans of TFA, that's not who we are. But so we are, at our core, sort of a mini university of some of the best teachers in New York City. So if you can get a mental model, we have about 1,000 teachers. We put out a catalog every semester. And that catalog consists of about 200 courses that meet anywhere from 1, 2, 3, or 5 times over the course of a semester. And about half of those courses are run by the teachers themselves. And about half of those courses are run by mathematicians and scientists and sort of experts in the field who are interested in having an audience with highly accomplished teachers. There's no grades, there's no completion test, there's no rules. I think the ethos of what we do, and then I'll stop, is that we sort of believe in trust. We walk that walk. We believe in recognition and respect, and we think that the only way that we're going to change the way we treat teachers in this country is if we actually believe and walk the walk of trust and recognition and respect. And insofar as our organization, the teachers lead the organization and they decide sort of what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, and with whom they want to spend their collaborative time. So for us, the power of our community is really important. We are very much a community, not a group. For those of you who are interested in the semantics of groups and communities, they're quite different things, right? So for us, all the teachers in our fellowship and everybody on our staff have some common ideas and some common beliefs, and we come together with some shared expertise. And so today, there are 3 teachers who have our fellowships, who are in our community, have been in our community for many, many years, who are serving as our panel esteemed experts today. And so the 4 of us got together a couple of times and we talked about sort of how we wanted to both highlight the challenges of professional learning communities nationally and what makes Math for America sort of combat some of those challenges, and speaking from their own experiences. So we have this fancy slide back here so you can actually read their names, but I'm gonna ask each of you, maybe start with Andrew and come back this way, just to briefly introduce yourself, tell everybody where you teach, and answer this sort of first question, which we wrote down, which is to, when you think about the teaching communities, in your own words, with brevity, because we'll do this again, describe your role in MFA.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Wille. I am a math teacher at Brooklyn Technical High School, which is a large public high school in Brooklyn. This is my 6th year as part of Math for America. What I really appreciate about the community is that it's given me an opportunity to have authentic leadership experiences without needing to leave the classroom. So I can spend most of my day thinking about students, but I also have the opportunity to work with some adults and to lead both small PLTs, which are professional learning teams, as well as some mini courses. It keeps me engaged both academically, and with other professionals in the field, pedagogically, and finally, it's really helped to bring the idea of teacher leadership from MFA into our school. So now teachers in our school understand what it is to be a teacher leader, and that culture has really taken over our school.
Good morning, my name is Lynn Shon. I'm a 7th grade STEM teacher and science instructional coach at Middle School 88 in Brooklyn. Any teachers from New York City in the room?
They're all on the left side.
MFA, my role with an MFA, I could sum up into 2 ways. I would say, MFA has given me the community to really lead in climate change and climate justice education, and whether that be writing curriculum or thinking about action projects that we as teachers can do together, and also being a part of a community that is really thinking critically about bringing anti-racism work into our schools. So MFA has brought those 2 things to life for me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julien, and I teach chemistry at the Bronx High School for Writing and Communication Arts. This is my 6th year in MFA, and what I appreciate about it is that there's this non-evaluative, low-stakes space for teachers to engage in professional growth and professional learning. I'm not a big risk taker, but because of as I speak to you publicly, but because of the trust that is built within the organization, it really pushes you to take risk and to go beyond your comfort zone. So I've had a lot of opportunities to participate and facilitate a number of just different professional learning opportunities. My interests particularly lie in classroom discussion, rigorous scientific discussion, and promoting more inquiry in the classroom. So I guess I've had that opportunity to really engage in something very specific and meaningful to me.
Thanks, you guys. So let's talk a little bit about the constructs of what makes the programming interesting. And very briefly, from schema, how many of you sort of lead PD efforts, run district level PD, run programs here at AP, right? So you'll sort of get a mental model of how that fits in our world. So we have offices, and we have 8 sort of classrooms. They're not typical classrooms, but they're 8 rooms where people can learn comfortably. And so in our fellowships, teachers from all over the 5 boroughs come to our offices whenever they want to take their courses. So all the courses, generally, with some exceptions, particularly for some of our science folks who do some of their research at universities, they come to our offices to take their courses. All of our courses, with plenty of exceptions, are 2 hours in duration, and they meet somewhere between 1 and 5 times over the course of the semester. I think that's important for a couple of reasons for our constructs. We never take teachers out of school. We never ask teachers to miss instruction with students in order to learn with one another. We never ask teachers to work on the weekends, on Saturdays or Sundays. We don't really ask teachers to do anything they don't want to do, but the courses run Monday through Friday from 5:30 to 7:30 at our offices. And so when Andrew and Lynn and Jude talk about courses that they've led, if you have a mental model of they come to MFA. MFA is also a place where there's anywhere from 80 to 100 teachers there on any given night. And there's about, I don't know, depending on when teachers get there, there's anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour sort of informal social time. And then everybody goes into the rooms and either leads courses or takes courses with their colleagues. So let's talk a little bit about sort of how those different constructs work. And we'll refrain from using a lot of our acronyms, which roll off our tongue pretty easily. And I'm sure we're all exhausted with acronyms, particularly if you've spent any time in New York. One of the structures that we have is a PLT, CE, however you define it. It's a professional learning team in our world. And Andrew, talk a little bit about being a leader of PLTs as well as being a participant, so that folks who are interested in designing something similar can have a mental model as well as what is meant for your leadership.
So the professional learning teams at MFA have been really a central part of my involvement in the community. 6 years ago, I started teaching AP Calculus for the first time, and so I joined the AP, or just the Calculus professional learning team. And while I knew calculus, I really learned a lot from that community about how to teach calculus and what students think about calculus and how they learn calculus. And a couple of years later, I ended up being asked to lead this same group of people, which was a really powerful experience for me. PLTs at MFA are widely varied, although what I appreciate about Math for America is they've put some sort of structure on it. So they say that there are 5 anchoring characteristics. There's a specific focus for each PLT. There's equitable engagement. There are multiple sources of expertise. No one person in that room is telling everyone else how to do it. Practice is made visible, and so it really deprivatizes the teaching practice. Oftentimes teaching can be isolating, individual. You're alone in your classroom with students, but there's not a lot of other people who see what goes on or other people who can offer advice or help. And the PLT is definitely something that can do this. And the 5th characteristic is that everyone in that room comes to that room with the understanding that they're there to improve their practice. And so you get an unbelievable community of people, unlike perhaps some other PD experiences where some people are engaged and other people are there to get hours or because they were told to do it. Everyone in the professional learning team room wants to be better. A couple ways in which this is done sort of practically. Oftentimes teachers will bring in student work so that a real life example of something that's happened in the classroom comes to the larger community instead of having a surface conversation of what it would be like to teach calculus well. There's actually something from the classroom that gets brought to the discussion. People share resources. Leadership is shared among the participants, so different teachers will lead different aspects, and overall, the leadership of the entire PLT will often rotate. And the final thing that I'll mention, which is really exciting, is it's a place where, one of the only places that I've experienced where teachers will come together to create something that is then brought back in the classroom and reflected on as part of this community. So just one example, in the calculus PLT, we created a task around the idea of limits in calculus, not just in the first sort of limits unit, but where does this idea show up throughout the course? And we had 12 or so teachers bring it into their individual classrooms, and from that we reflected on how our students from all over the city of New York, from all sorts of different backgrounds, every borough, reacted to this task. And what we found is that students have their own differences, but also there's something uniform about a 17 or 18-year-old child, and we really learned a lot about our students through this experience.
Lynn, can I go slightly off script? Can you describe a little bit sort of the strands of focus of catalog, sort of, not all the particulars, but Andrew just talked a lot about, I would argue, a content strand. Like, certainly there's pedagogical work done within that, but a highly focused group of folks talking about mathematics. Can you talk about some of the other sort of strands in the catalog or some of the other formats that sort of complement what Andrew just said? And then Jude, if you want to riff off of Lynn, which is finished.
So there are different types of structures for the courses. There's the PLT structure. There's also the mini course structure, which is structured more like a lecture where, you know, there's a resident expert, teacher expert, who is sharing their expertise to a group. And then there's the single session workshop, which is it's just one session, 1 2-hour session that is lecture style. And then there's also the interest groups.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm probably doing a really bad job explaining these, but I will say the strands, the big strands that come to mind for me at MFA. There's content, as Andrew spoke about. There's pedagogy. There's so much within pedagogy. There are subgroups across different areas of pedagogy and content areas within pedagogy. And then there's, in my mind, I can't not think about advocacy work and social justice work. That's kind of like the bubble that I found within MFA. And so I find that the course book has really evolved over the last 5 years that I've been in the Master Teacher Fellowship, where, you know, the strands keep changing, and for good reason, because I think that MFA, a big part of the model is really engaging teachers and giving feedback continuously, which has really shifted the conversation since I first became a master teacher.
Yeah, so like Andrew, a lot of my work has been in working with professional learning teams as well. As I mentioned a little earlier, my interest, one of my biggest interests lies in rigorous scientific discussion and promoting inquiry. So I've done a number of PLTs around this where, you know, we develop a criteria for what, you know, rigorous scientific discussion looks like, and what scientific inquiry looks like, and, you know, we'll create tasks or activities that meet that criteria and actually implement it into the classroom. So I think all of the different strands are great. The PLT structure in particular allows for just a lot more of transfer into the classroom, right, as opposed to like a one-off session or something like that, where you're actually, you know, testing something out. And I just thought that it's had probably the biggest impact just on my teaching as a whole, because I'm trying out new things, testing new things.
Thanks, Jude. Let's see, I'm going to try to answer a couple questions within the context of this question. So one of the attributes, if you will, that makes Math for America a really powerful, collaborative community, and it's also somewhat controversial, is we're a closed community of teachers, right? So none of the work that we do is open to public teacher off the street, for lack of a better term. So everyone needs to apply to our organization. It's I won't go into all the details of the application, but I think that teachers would probably argue that there's a little blood lost, and it feels somewhat like applying to graduate school, right? Does that seem right? Sorry about that. But so we're a closed community, right? So you can make a lot of assumptions about the people in the room when you're in a professional learning moment with other people who you know have been accepted into this organization. So can each of you very briefly talk about some of the pros and cons of being in a bit of a, I mean, certainly not homogenous in lots of other ways, but from a excellence perspective and from a experience perspective and a little bit of a, I don't know, foundational perspective, I would argue it is controversial. So talk a little bit about that. Whoever wants to go first. Maybe we'll start with Jude and go down briefly about what are the pros and cons of closed versus open learning together.
Yeah, so I think one of the pros is that you're generally going to have just like a highly selective, highly engaged group of individuals centered around just professional learning and professional growth. There's a lot more just buy-in from the group. I think because of that.
Maybe let's start with just those two pros, and then we'll do cons. Then
yeah, so those are I think some of the pros.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is it creates a braver space, especially when you're doing work that is challenging, when we're having conversations about how to bring anti-racism work into our classrooms, to have implicit bias training from top down, just to check off a box and say we did it. That really creates different outcomes in both teachers and, of course, our students in our classrooms. So I think, as Jude said, there's buy-in and there's a certain starting level of trust. But as Megan said earlier, this is a fellowship that's long-term. You build lasting relationships with people, and I think that space gets braver and braver as you meet people who have shown commitment to the same work that you're committed to, and yeah.
I'm going to take a brief moment to geek out a little bit. One of my favorite things about the real numbers is that they are well ordered, meaning you have any two real numbers, and
I knew this was going to happen.
I'm sorry. One is either greater than the other, or less than the other, or they're the same number, which leads to a cool proof about how 0.9 repeating is equal to 1. Anyway, so the real numbers can all be placed on a line. There's an order. You know which one is greater and which one is less. And my favorite thing about the MFA community is that the community members of Math for America are not well ordered. Given any two members in the community, there is not one that is greater than the other. It's a real space where I can look around the room and I know that I have some expertise to share, yet there are people in that room who are better at one aspect of teaching or math or understanding students or delivering content in their classroom than I am. So it really creates an authentic experience where every single person in that room is teaching but also learning at the same time. So it's a really peer-to-peer experience and not an authoritative sort of community in any way.
Yeah, we try to find people who have humility, right? It's like
yes.
Like a thing in it. So why don't we keep going and come back the other way with as much brevity as time will allow. Will each of you give us what's a pretty big con to this sort of community? What is hard about it?
It is nice when something that you do in a group, in an intimate setting, has a broader impact. And so in some ways, it would be nice if the work that these groups did affected every single teacher in New York City, every single teacher in New York State, or the country at large. And I know that there are sort of organizational things being done to address this. But as a teacher member, it's nice when you create something excellent and then that thing gets amplified, on a large scale.
Some of the cons, not every school in New York City is the same, and so for me, I'm very fortunate that my principal allows me to take the work that I do at MFA and bring it back to my school, whether it be through leading professional learning or what I'm testing in the classroom. Not every teacher has that flexibility, and so there's that limitation. And I think also the fact that it's a closed community has the danger of creating a culture of elitism, which, there's a lot to unpack there, but, how can we really be inclusive through empowering the teachers to bring back the work for everyone? Because the whole point is for this work to make the most impact on all of our students. So really circling back to that question as a community is really important.
Yeah, and along the lines, an impressive stat is that Megan mentions that 10% of the STEM teachers are in math or America, and that's, like I said, that's pretty impressive. But then there's the other 90%, right? So if we're doing this great work, how do we branch that out to the other 90% of STEM teachers in New York City? So I think that's something that just needs to be, considered.
So there's a couple questions on here that I want to address before I move forward, just because I think they're simple and they allow for some clarity. So these are numbers, of the, let's call it 1,000 teachers, about 72% of them are high school teachers, about 22 to 23 to 24, depending on how you define middle school in New York City, are middle school teachers, and we have a robust group of 47 elementary school teachers. So a bunch of you asked questions about elementary school teachers here. We allow teachers to apply and be accepted into our fellowship if they are math or science sort of geeks. Like if they jam out on being interested in mathematics or science, we want them in our fellowship regardless of their, in elementary school, regardless of their lack of mathematics or science licensure, because there is no such thing in New York City. So there's some questions in here that sort of lead into this idea of leadership. And so I guess sort of morphing a little bit on what we said, I think a lot about leadership. I think a lot of people in this room do, and I talk about the best kind of leadership is the lowercase L leadership, where teachers are encouraged, empowered, and feel ready to lead from within their classroom and have opportunities to have an impact both in and outside of their classroom. For those of you who do work in the research areas around educational leadership, I think that there's a lot of talk about sort of the difference between classroom teachers and school teachers, and I think both myself personally and myself as the organization that I run, I think we're in desperate need of more school teachers. I think that we need teachers who are experts in the classroom and feel it's their responsibility on behalf of their students and their communities to have a voice with politicians, whether that's politicians as school leaders or local politicians or citywide politicians or national politicians. So I love to see teachers at national conferences like South by, because I think not enough teachers either have the opportunity or feel like they would belong, and I think that they do. So certainly the folks to my left, and I imagine any teacher in this room sees him or her their self as a classroom teacher, not a school teacher, not a classroom teacher. But talk very briefly about what does leadership mean to you as a teacher, whether that plays into your Math for America experience or your experience at your school, briefly, and how does it sort of think about like leadership as different from, in addition to teaching your kids? And either way. Lynn, why don't you start?
Sure. It's taken me, I've been in the classroom for 9 years, and it's taken me quite a while to be able to articulate why I'm doing this work. And I would say that ultimately I'm doing this for social justice, and I think leadership, teacher leadership, means a lot of different things for me, but for me it's being able to be a leader in achieving social justice. And so one interesting story at MFA, I took a single session workshop from a city government official. She was basically facilitating a workshop focused on looking at environmental conditions and health across different New York City neighborhoods and the disparities across different neighborhoods. And I was so blown away by that workshop that I ended up leading a mini course focused on similar content, that built upon similar content, but translating that into classroom projects for students. And that then led me to finding a community of educators across New York City and the nation that is advocating for climate justice education in city policy. So I found myself in this Kizzy Charles Guzman, her office, with the mayor's office, mayor's team, advocating for this change, and we are in the process of doing this right now.
Sure. One thing I really like about the idea of leading with a lowercase l is it really gets to what leadership is. And I think that leadership, that you lead when ideas are listened to and are amplified and are made important. But the important thing about leading with the lowercase l is understanding that what happens through the community of teachers or in your classroom through the community of students is meant to sort of bring out different ideas and sort of make them something bigger than the people themselves. And so for me, a big part of teacher leaders is finding reasonable structures for the ideas that different teachers have within their own classes and different ideas that they have about pedagogy and content, and bringing those together in such a way that the best ideas interact with one another to become something greater than any individual single teacher could create on their own. The other interesting aspect that I'll mention is, in schools oftentimes there's this idea of sort of administration sort of telling teachers what to do, and then teachers responding by saying, no, we have our own ideas and we're in the classroom and this is what we want to do. And I think there's something subtler that can go on with teacher leadership, which is sort of responding to structures of schools or of classrooms and finding ways of being the voice of good pedagogy and what's good for for our students within those structures of the school.
Should we do this briefly now? There's a good Julien questions on here.
I'll make it quick. So the two things that came to mind is just that when you look at good leadership, they recognize what works well in the setting and you amplify that. And then you also are able to recognize what your deficiencies are and then seek out resources to help rectify those deficiencies.
So there's a question that's got a lot of the little thumb things on it. So no, I'm going to read it sort of verbatim, and then maybe one of you take a stab at it, and then I'll chime in, or we can see how it goes. But this is about requiring professional development versus having people go to things they're interested in. So knowing that much PD, throw in a bunch of acronyms, PD, PLTs, PCs, time can be required for teachers rather than voluntary. What advice do you have in order to help replicate what we do in our environment where there's not the same requirement perspective? Hold on a second. Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well,
Jude, you want me to rephrase it, don't you? Yeah. So I'll say something. I think people go to things they're interested in. If something feels important, they'll be there. I think that requirements are for minors. My son has a lot of requirements. I think that's fine. I don't think adults really need requirements as much as we think they do, particularly in education. Sure, there's requirements for our fellowship, as there are with anything, but there's not many. And so what do you think about sort of volunteering to be involved in things versus being told to be involved in things from a professional learning perspective?
I'll take a stab at that.
Yeah,
I think that it really goes back to trust. I think that if you actually trust teachers, you will know that teachers want to learn, they want to grow, and they want to do what's best for their kids. So if I had it my way, we trust teachers, and we let teachers choose what professional learning they want to pursue, and they'll do it.
And if it's not good work, they won't. Right? That's also sort of underscored there. Yeah.
Well, just to add to that, I'm a person who enjoys structures and not being told what to do, but sort of having something in place that gives me feedback that I'm doing things well. And so what I appreciate about MFA as a community is there are certain requirements. There are certain hours that have to be fulfilled, yet the way in which you fulfill those hours or the way in which you engage with the community is really up to the individual. And so it's a nice balance of saying, yes, as a professional, you are expected to continue learning, and the ways in which you continue learning are something that we care about and that teachers should also have a voice in.
So there's some other questions in here that sort of link to that, and if I were to merge some of them together, the audience is interested in sort of, do virtual communities have the same bonds as the ones where people are person to person? So, Jude, maybe give us a stat. Do you feel like something would be lost, or what would be lost or gained if people weren't always face-to-face when they were learning, if there was a virtual place for, whether it's for convenience of time and asynchronization, or because people are in like different cities?
I think it sort of depends on the individual. I mean, like, we're in a day and age where people definitely engage a lot more online through social media, and I think there definitely is a space and a need, and that it's important. But I think that there still also needs to be sometimes set apart where there is this actual face-to-face, in-person, where you can have that, maybe I'm telling my age a little bit, but
It's not what you think.
but I think there's something that I think that you do miss if you're not in the same room as the person at some point.
I think some of the best conversation I've had at MFA has been over pizza and soda, which is in the half hour before the workshop start. And for that reason, I think that the interpersonal physical connection is really important.
Yeah. A couple of folks asked, we do have an internal platform, we have an LMS. We use at its guts, it's a Salesforce platform, and we've customized most of it. We call it the Small World Network, and it's a place where teachers blog, throw up resources, we make announcements, et cetera, et cetera. That sort of speaks to this, sometimes virtual, sometimes not virtual. I think though, as an organization, and as people, and maybe this is also me too, we're people first, and I don't think you can build the same kinds of relationships virtually that you can in person. I think any of you, particularly who run PD, know that there's, as Jude was saying, there's certainly some efficiencies. We do lots and lots of things online, and we have lots of podcasts and lots of Zooms and lots of Skypes and but never at the replacement of people to people. I think it's as Lynn said before, the organization has teachers who have been in the organization, some of them for, Mohammed, how long have you been at MFA? Like 10 years? Yeah. So really sorry to call you a reviewer. So there's really something about people having long-lasting professional relationships. There's 155 chemistry teachers in MFA, so I don't imagine that Jude can name them all. But Jude can have a community of chemistry teachers with whom he can go to and ask for advice and get feedback and et cetera. He doesn't have to hang with any chemistry teachers if he doesn't want to, but I think that kind of relationship, and I do the same thing going on the road, but is really at the heart of what we value in some of this community work. Can we segue a little bit to your schools and what the impact is on your schools from MFA? There's lots of questions there, which is sort of cool because we actually plan to talk about that. So let's talk a little bit, not too much, about concrete, noticeable differences of impact in your schools because of the community with whom you work at MFA. Andrew, why don't you start?
Sure. So over the past 3 or 4 years, I've been in a really fortunate situation of being able to bring the structures of the professional learning team into our school as something that groups of teachers do every day. And this was done in collaboration and with support from administration, in collaboration with an excellent math coach, and with a bunch of teachers who are also MFA master teachers who stepped up and said, yes, this is something that I value, this is something that's important to me, and I'm willing to be part of these common planning teams within the school. What I will say is that if you're going to attempt to do something like this, you need to be incredibly mindful that the school is a different community than MFA. And so learn from these teacher communities like MFA, and when you bring them into schools or into other PD spaces, be incredibly mindful of the different people involved, the different structures involved, the fact that the school is strictly professional, it is your job, it's not a fellowship. And if those things are in mind, the lessons learned from things like professional learning teams can be implemented and have been implemented in our math department quite successfully.
Do you want to add?
New York State just adapted the next generation science standards, and as a result of the learning that I've done alongside other science teachers at MFA, I would say that my school is truly at the forefront of teaching and implementing the new standards. So that's something very concrete. My entire department, I think, is really ready for these changes. Another example, concrete example, is the anti-racism work at my school. Like, we have an actual anti-racist team, and we meet bi-weekly, and we are really looking critically at how to change our disciplinary practices and our curriculum to be more culturally responsive.
I know at my school we've incorporated a lot of the protocols from the PLT, from the professional learning teams, and looking at student work and analyzing student work and reflecting. We do a lot of visitations where, once again, like, we're also using like very specific language from a lot of the things that we've done, at MFA. So there's definitely been a transfer in the school setting as well.
If I can just add one additional thing.
It is not a math.
It is not a math proof. In addition to sort of bringing in the structures of MFA, one of the biggest shifts in our school and in our math department in particular has been in the culture and in the idea that teachers should be part of conversations of curriculum, part of conversations of student learning, part of conversations of what it means to understand our students. And so in addition to sort of structures, there's been an overall shift in sort of teaching as a professional activity that's taken place in our school.
There's a bunch of questions here that I think I want to address, and they're probably for me to address, just because they're for me to address, but it'll help lay some landscape. So teachers are paid, yes. It is a fellowship. New York City numbers here, but we're pretty public about it. So each of these fine folks to my left receives a $15,000 a year stipend, taxable. In New York City, it's not the same as in Texas, but in New York City, that is about the difference between a first-year assistant principal or a full-time coach and a seventh-year teacher. So for us, if someone wants to go into administration, I'm the first one to say the best administrators have been exceptional teachers. So I was a principal, so I'm not anti-leadership at all. But if teachers are considering leaving the classroom for monetary purposes, we hope that the amount of money that they receive annually dissuades them from needing to do that for their families or their lives outside of school. So over 4 years, they'll receive, quick math here, $60,000. And there's a bunch of other money we throw their way at every turn for traveling to conferences here, to supplies for their classrooms. We really try to sort of remove as many barriers as we can financially. So a lot of you have questions about admissions, so I'll just be brief. We look for 4 things in our application process, for those of you who design similar type works. We look for content expertise, and we have a variety of proxies for how we measure that. Some of them objective and some of them subjective. Would you say that's fair to say? We look for pedagogical expertise. We have a variety of proxies for how we measure that. We look for a true belief that actually every single student can be successful, and there's a high level of efficacy around student learning. So I'll leave that there. We're pretty clear about how we suss that out. And the 4th 4th, we're actually interested in sort of what we were sort of jokingly talking about before, which is a little bit of humility. We actually only want people in the fellowship who do not believe that they've arrived and they have nothing left to learn. So you know that teacher, I know you do. But we are interested in teachers who actually believe in a growth mindset, and they actually do want to collaborate. They do feel like they have something to offer and something to learn. So those are sort of the admissions constructs. There is a very significant amount of money involved. Teachers can apply again. That's why Mohammed's been in the fellowship for 10 years. After 4 years, you can apply again for a slightly different, but mostly the same fellowship. And for right now, there's no expiration date on how many fellowships you can receive from our organization. And we are only mathematics and science and computer science. I think this question came up. Truth, from our founder. Our founder is a quite famous mathematician. And so we are not able to, nor is it our focus to support teachers in every content area, but that's not to say that every teacher in every content area isn't important, but our focus is in STEM education. I think I've tackled most of the questions, at least on here, even though the mouse isn't working. So let's briefly give some advice, shall we? So folks in this room are probably in lots of different arenas. They are either school leaders, policymakers, they run programs at their district level or their school level. There's probably a bunch of startup tech folks in the room. So if you could give them 2 pieces of advice if they wanted to start up something similar to our fellowship program, or they didn't, but they were going to start up a more mainstreamed professional development workshop program, or they already do one now. What advice do you have for folks who sort of lead the designs, if you will, bringing teachers together? Briefly, 2. Andrew, why don't you start?
So the formula is that there is no simple formula for doing this effectively. So if you came here hoping to get a bullet point list of what to do, that doesn't work. It takes people who are dedicated to understanding content, to understanding students, and to understanding pedagogy, and people who are dedicated to continuing to adapt with those goals in mind to whatever comes up next. So I guess that's number 1. Number 1 is that there's no formula. Number 2 is just something that I've found to be pretty helpful, which is to focus on concrete tasks that the community will do together. So what is it that you'll sit down and work on together as a community of people? And the reason why I think this is important is it's a natural way to lead towards some sort of assessment or reflection, both on what has been done and for the members of the community on their involvement and engagement in the community. So when you sit down and say, we're gonna, I don't know, for example, we're gonna write a task, a 20-minute task for students to do in groups in their classrooms. You can then come back and say, were we successful? Did we work on this as a team? And how were the members of this teacher community involved in creating this? And often, the conversations that come out of a concrete task are much more than just about that concrete task.
The first thing that came to my mind is creating the space, physical space, to build community and foster relationships. One thing that didn't come up yet were the Thursday things. We have informal social/academic geeky gatherings where MFA staff invites an expert in some STEM field, some area of the STEM field, and they give a talk. And a lot of really interesting conversations generate from those informal social gatherings, and they continue beyond MFA. So how do you foster relationships? I think feeding teachers, giving them space, giving them some wine and beer, that helps. MFA does that, happy hours. And the other thing that came to my mind was, I guess, the importance of choosing teachers who have a diversity of expertise and passions, because that really creates a dynamic community that can think very critically about how to be the best teachers we can be.
For me, I was thinking about it, but having an organization that's able to respond to the needs of the people within the organization, I think is critical. It's kind of, it's a slight irony there where I think that a lot of schools have a hard time, adapting and changing, but, like you have like an organization that MFA that's able to do that probably for a variety of reasons. But I think that's critical in terms of just allowing more growth within the organization. And then recruiting individuals that have the capacity to just being open to trying new things. And we spoke a little bit about before about like just not thinking that you arrived and that you have nothing nothing else to learn or to grow in. So yeah, just making sure that you're able to recruit and retain individuals with this growth mindset.
I would add to, or weave through that I think the magic of collaboration happens in between anything concrete. So having opportunities for people to come together in large groups and small groups and no groups at all is really an important mindset to think about when you're organizing professional communities. And then as someone who spends my whole job thinking about these sorts of things, I would say that change happens at the speed of trust. I think that happens in our personal lives and our professional lives, and I think that these folks here would probably say that when you're in MFA the first year, maybe even the first 2 years, you have no idea what the hell's going on, right? You're sort of just like, this can't be real, no one's telling us what to do, everybody here's, this isn't true, this is like super crazy smarter than me, like why am I here? And you feel like there's like some trickery happening, right? And then there's not. And then you sort of become confident in your own excellence, and everybody came in as an excellent practitioner, but there's something about, as a country, we have such a knee-jerk reaction to bureaucracies feel safe, rules feel comforting, structures are super important, but those are very different than sort of handcuffs. And I think that I would encourage folks, and I do encourage folks all the time, to write down the 5 rules of your organization and throw 3 of them out for a week. Just see what happens. Just throw 3 of them out. And if what your organization is doing is meaningful and the people in your organization feel safe, they're still going to do exactly what you wanted them to do without those rules, and maybe even more. But the more rules you have, the less people feel trusted and the less they feel confined by doing only what they're supposed to do. Those are sort of the ideals from which we try to draw on. But it's a dance for sure. Let's see, let's take one more question and then I think we have to wrap it up. Let's see, there's a lot of this. How do we assess what we do? What's success look like for us? How many of you work in public education in the public space, right? And how many of you work in the private sector in some ways? So the private sector folks probably have some public money, right? Or some public folks probably have some private money. And with all of that cross-pollination of money is often accountability. And so in our world, we wrestle a lot with this really, I completely am very cognizant of this champagne problem we have, where we have no public money, so we're accountable to no one. It actually, though, makes things challenging because we know what success looks like. From a very concrete perspective, our aim, our main goal is to keep great teachers in the classroom for longer, right? So for those of you who dabble in the research world, we look at retention rates and attrition rates often and a lot in a variety of different slices. But that's not enough. We also are really interested, and success to us looks like teachers who see teaching as a career that they're proud of and see themselves as the professionals they are. And for those of you who do that kind of work, that's just hard to measure, right? Can I just curse? Yeah. It just is, it's hard to measure. So we're really interested in efficacy of teachers. We're really interested in looking at change and efficacy over time. We're really interested in stories of impact and how teachers, I say all the time that we'd really like 1,000 teachers to impact 10,000 other teachers. And so we really look at sort of that continuum along the way. And so for us, success looks like a city that looks different with kids who have more rights and more access to great teachers, because all of the research shows that teachers learn when they have an experienced teacher in the room. I'll say what we don't care about. We don't care about teacher evaluation models. There's a place for teacher eval, but not in Math for America. We don't care about test scores of students. We don't care about them at all. I'm a huge advocate of assessment, but we can all agree, I think, that the testing models are flawed when it comes to linking a teacher's success with his or their student's success, because all kids don't come to school with the same opportunities. And so we don't use a lot of hard metrics to measure success when it comes to instruction of the teacher or the school or the students. And that's what makes it really challenging, because we have a very clear vision, but our success doesn't always fit into a box of what people are comfortable or used to seeing. And we're okay with that, but it's a hard thing to explain to people because it's so nuanced.
Can I add one thing from a teacher perspective in Math for America? At the end of every course or session or event that we attend, there's a survey that we fill out. And if you facilitate a course, you get anonymous access to the information. And for me, that's one of the most powerful forms of feedback that I've received, is knowing what other members of the community think about what I've done and knowing what they think about how I could improve. And so it's a way of assessing without that assessment being evaluative or being punitive in any way, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So I'll end by saying, in the face of educational strife that I think we're in, I heard someone the other day say something that really resonated with me, and he said, when you have ideals and principles, they only really hold true if you use them when it's not convenient. And I think as an organization and all of us as individuals, we're very strong-minded about what it means to be a public school teacher, and we hold true to those ideals even when it's not convenient. So thank you everybody for coming today. I think we'll hang out. Thank you.